One question that comes up a lot among my coaching clients and sometimes my consulting clients is the question of how do I know if I'm doing enough? How do I know if I'm reading enough, if I'm writing enough, if I'm studying enough? How do I make sure that I'm on track? How do I make decisions? And how do I feel good about the work that I'm doing? And I've been thinking about this and thinking about the underlying subtext of that question. How do I know that I'm doing enough or what is enough? And what comes up a lot is questions around worthiness. So, how do I know if I am enough, which you are? And questions around discernment. How do I make decisions that I can feel good about, that I can feel confident in? And so for today, I am going to explore that topic. I'm going to be talking to you about discernment, about how to define enough for yourself, and how to create your own rules to help you with feeling good, feeling more confident in your decision making process and confident in knowing that you're doing good work and that you get to celebrate yourself for the progress that you're making. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your Femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. I have to admit that I was really close to not releasing this week's episode and instead releasing a replay because there have been so many hurdles in the week that have led to me almost not recording this. I probably also was doing too much. And then I reminded myself, you know what? I need to record a good enough episode. I have a lot to say on this topic. In fact, I have created an entire handout on this topic that I've shared with a few of my coaching clients. And so I have more than enough information to record a brief podcast episode for you so that you all can also benefit from my insights. So I'm going to talk to you about why discernment matters. I'm going to talk to you about the purpose of having your own rules, how to notice the signals, what these types of rules look like, and when you might need to revisit or adjust your rules so that at the end of the day, you can build that self-trust, you can make more confident decisions, and again, you can feel good about the work you're doing. And this isn't just something that comes up with my coaching clients who are predominantly first-gen grad students and early career professionals. It also comes up among my friends and colleagues too. So when I have networking calls, when I check in with folks, this comes up. This comes up for entrepreneurs. It comes up for academics, for folks in corporate. As recent as this week, I had a colleague reach out to me to ask me, Yvette, what do you do when institutions push back against your accommodation requests? And it was a whole conversation around doing work virtually versus in person. I'm not going to go into the details, but what this prompted me to think about was this conversation of coming up with your own rules, because I told this person, you know what? While I have no control over what an institution does around, how they're going to go about organizing events and setting up classroom spaces in ways that may or may not be accessible to others, I do have control over how I respond to that. I do have control over my own internal guidelines, rules, policies to protect myself. And that can help to inform when I'm willing to push back to reach a compromise and when I let it go altogether and just turn down the opportunity. So it all starts with discernment. It all starts with this skill that we can all benefit from strengthening around how you decide, your ability to determine what's right or not for you based on what matters most to you. A lot of times when we make decisions according to our short-term goals, sometimes according to our long-term goals, but it can also include other things like your values, your identities, your energy, your capacity. And this is something that you'll get better at doing over time. You'll get better at starting to lean into your intuition, meaning your body's internal data, your body's signals to you of what feels right and wrong. And as you gain more self-awareness, this discernment skill will be stronger and you will feel better about the decisions that you make. And to build up your discernment skills, what can help support you in that process is coming up with these rules. The internal rules that you make for yourself are going to help to protect you. And this is going to make it so that instead of waiting until you're burnt out, waiting until you get sick, waiting until you're feeling a certain way that really doesn't feel good, you don't have to get to that point to notice the signals. You don't have to get to that point to take care of yourself. So these rules can do things like reduce your decision fatigue, prevent feelings of resentment or burnout, exhaustion. They can help you align your actions with your values or with your capacity or both. And they can help you make progress on what matters most to you, again, without constantly feeling depleted and overextended. And if you're thinking right now that you're not sold because you don't want another set of rules to follow, if you feel like that's just too rigid for me, please hear me out. This is not meant to be a rigid system. This is really about guardrails. So gentle guardrails, flexible guardrails too, so that you know your limits, so that you can create a sense of safety within yourself. Like, you know what? I know what's right and wrong for me, and I can make decisions based on that internal knowing. And it also helps you to feel like every single time an opportunity comes up, every single time you're doing your work, you don't have to decide from scratch. Oh, every time I have to figure out what's enough. Every time I have to figure out what I have to say yes or no to. You can lean on these rules to help simplify that process. Okay, so the first part is you need to notice the signals. So in order to become better at discerning what's right or wrong for you and knowing what is enough, you need to know when your body is signaling that this is not it, that this is not right, that something is off. And I'll give you a few cues based on my own personal examples. For me, one very obvious cue that something is off is when I start to feel resentful. This came up a lot more in grad school when I would say yes to everything. So I would get requests to edit my peers' papers, my colleagues' papers, and I would say yes, and I would do it before I would even do my own work. And then I would build up resentment because I found myself having no time for my own work. And I wish that I had listened to that cue and set a boundary and set a rule around maybe I no longer edit people's work for free. Or maybe I do, but I cap it at only X amount of times per month. And then after that, I redirect them to someone else. There's different ways that you could use that signal to make a change. Then another cue for me was feeling exhausted and flaring up. And of course, I continued to push through. Even though I would get sick, even though I'd feel tired all the time, even though my body was telling me, you're doing too much, I didn't listen. And so I wish that I would have noticed the cues and made different decisions around how much work was enough based on when I noticed that I was flaring up so that I wouldn't have to keep flaring up.
Hi, I'm Dr. Janice Castro, licensed psychologist and host of Latine ADHD, where cultura and ADHD intersect. This is a space for Latina adults navigating ADHD or supporting someone who is. We talk about what ADHD really looks like in our communities, how stigma shows up, and how healing begins when we bring cultura and connection into the conversation. Our stories don't always fit the textbooks, and that's okay. Here, you'll find real talk, practical tools, and representation that honors every kind of mind. We center Latina voices and welcome BIPOC stories that share the same fight for understanding, compassion, and belonging. Each episode is an invitation to unlearn shame, laugh a little, and build resilience together. Follow Latina ADHD wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to my newsletter for stories and tools from our comunidad.
And then the last cue that came up a lot, not just for me, but actually this is a big one among my clients, is the cue of feeling anxious and guilty. And I notice it because I'll notice some folks will make decisions out of fear. They make decisions out of fear of missing out, fear of disappointing others, fear of not being liked. And if that's you, ask yourself if there's something that you can do differently and what you would do differently if you weren't acting out of anxiety, out of guilt, out of people pleasing. So again, the first step in figuring out what is enough, in getting better at your discernment skills, in coming up with your own rules, is noticing the signals. And then you use those signals to turn that awareness into action. So you look at the signals and ask yourself, based on what I'm noticing here, what boundary, what system, what rule could prevent this next time around? And then comes the question of defining what is enough for you. And I will admit this is very hard to do, but you can start with a few reflective questions. You can ask yourself, well, first off, how do I know that I've done enough for today or for this week? How do I know when it's not enough? How do I know when it's too much? Also, you can ask yourself, what does balance or harmony or integration look like for me this semester or this season? So think about your current reality. Are you in a particular season where maybe you need to tend to your health more? Maybe you need to tend to dependence more. And so that means that the balance is going to make it so that you have less time for your other work. And that means that your other work is not going to be always the stellar work that you were hoping it to be. So recognize what's on your plate and how it's going to impact the rest of your workload and what enough is in that season or in that semester or time of year, etc. And then notice the patterns. So ask yourself, what patterns lead to me feeling resentful? What patterns lead to me feeling exhausted or flared up? What patterns lead to me feeling guilty? So that way you can use that to inform, again, this question of answering, what is enough for me? I can't tell you what enough is for you. And even if I knew what was enough for you, I can't tell you that that's going to be the case all the time because it's going to change. It changes based on the season that you're in, based on your capacity, based on your changing circumstances. And that's up to you. You want to check in with yourself when things feel off so that way you can figure out, oh, I might need to redefine what enough is for me right now. It's changing. Then comes creating your rules. So you notice the signals. You have a sense of when your body's telling you that something is too much so that it helps you to inform what is enough. But now you got to protect yourself with those rules. Think about some common areas where you start to notice the cues, where you start to notice the signals. Is it having to do with conferencing? I have a client who has got way too many conferences on their schedule. And so they realize, okay, moving forward, I might need to set a rule around the number of conferences I'm willing to attend per year because this is too much, or even the number of conferences I can attend per semester or quarter, again, because this is too much. Or is it around writing? Most of my clients are writing because a lot of them are academics or grad students. So what is enough? How many hours of writing is realistic for you to get done per week? And when are you going to get that done? And if you start to notice the signal that makes you say, okay, something's got to change, maybe you start to feel dread or guilt or anxiety, then what can you do to change this? Maybe you need to revisit your schedule. Maybe you need to take a break from your writing. So ask yourself, when do I feel most creative and when do I feel most strained, so that you can align your writing with that and come up with a rule for that. Maybe the rule is I will write for 5 to 7 hours per week, and it's going to be split into 2 focused blocks, one of them during the weekday and one of them on a weekend. That way I know I will get to it. Maybe you need a rule around your service work. Maybe you're doing too much mentoring. Maybe you are taking on too many students during your office hours. So ask yourself, how much unpaid labor can I maintain right now? How much service work is enough? And it doesn't have to just be around what others people say is enough. It can also be around your capacity. Maybe you only have the capacity to take on 2 students right now, and your 2 mentees are enough. So any other person that comes after that, you redirect them, or you ask them to come back next year, or you recommend other resources to them. That can be your rule. You can even have rules around communicating, around how often you check your emails. You can have rules around resting and recharging. So do you get to give yourself permission to take 1 or 2 full rest days per week where you're not doing any of your work? That can be a rule too. Maybe you have an extra rule around flare-ups. So if your body flares up, you reschedule your writing instead of pushing through. And all of this, once you start to notice the cues, once you start to define what enough is and come up with some rules and practice them, you'll notice when they need to be refined. You'll notice when you're like, okay, that was better, but it's still not it. I still have to refine it further. That's fine. It's an iterative process. So revisit it as needed, adjust as needed. Ask yourself again, is this rule still serving me? If not, do I need to change it or let it go? Well, you can ask yourself, where am I still feeling resentful? Where am I still flaring up again because of this one thing that keeps coming up? How can I change that? What new rule, what adjustment can I make so that I feel in alignment? And just to wrap things up, I want to remind you that discernment really is about trusting yourself. It's about trusting yourself to make decisions that honor your full self, your full humanity, the things that matter to you beyond just academics or your work. And I want to remind you that sometimes these feelings that come up that are uncomfortable, they're just there to protect you. They're there to remind you that maybe you need a firmer boundary. Maybe you need a different rule. Maybe you need to do things differently. It takes time, but you can do this little by little with baby steps. Just keep one small promise to yourself for a week and see what happens, or test out one small rule and then celebrate yourself for following through on that rule. It's going to take time, but you can get there. And I say this as someone who has a lot of rules and policies in place to protect myself. And so I know that it's something that can work. Test it out, see how it feels. And if it feels right, then keep it up and keep iterating as needed. The last message I want to leave you with is just reminding you that I'm not telling you to think about discernment and think about defining enough and creating these rules as a means of having to always be in control, because that's not realistic. We can't always be in control of everything. But it's really about care and about reminding yourself that you have options. Because sometimes that's the thing that comes up the most, is we feel like we're not doing enough. And we feel like the question of enough is defined outside of us, and that feels very much out of our control. But you do have choice. You do have a say, and you do get to make decisions for yourself. All right, that's it for today's episode. I hope that you found it helpful. And as always, I'll talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.